All right, folks, how you doing? Welcome back. We got the religions of Scotland. Did Presbyterianism have crypto-Jewish origins? Part 2. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act, 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. And once again, this is a summary of the book, When Scotland Was Jewish. Links are in the description below where you can get the actual book, which I highly recommend. So we're starting off with the persecution of Jews and Huguenots. So the book states that many Huguenots were of Jewish Moorish blood, and in France both Jews and Huguenots were persecuted with equal intensity. They were condemned by law and their assets were seized. The book also makes the point that the Protestant Reformation originated from nations where the Sephardim fled to. The Reformation. So according to the book, the main difference between the Reformation in Scotland and England was that the English tried to maintain certain elements of their previous Roman Catholicism, whereas in Scotland the Reformers took on a far more back-to-basics approach. The authors basically argue that the Scottish Reformation was a proactive move back towards older Judaism. John Calvin. So the focus now shifts to John Calvin, born in France in the early 16th century. In his early years, he served the noble de Montmore family and studied to be a priest. He later moved to Paris, befriending Nicholas and Michael Kopp, both crypto-Jews, who were the sons of the king's physician. Calvin studied law for a time, but later went on to study the humanities. He also learned Greek and became fluent in Hebrew. Calvin in Geneva. So Calvin became Protestant at a fairly young age, and his friend Nicholas Kopp became rector of Paris University. Calvin helped him prepare his inaugural address, which was highly Protestant in tone. This got them both into trouble. You had to imagine it did, with Kopp being summoned before the Parisian Parliament. So he fled instead to Switzerland, which was strongly Protestant, and Calvin went to Geneva. Yeah, I bet they were both like, fuck this, let's get the hell out of here. I just imagine. William Farel. So Calvin met William Farel, Sephardic, who founded the Reformed Church in Geneva. Calvin established Protestant schools there, though various forms of Protestant theology were still being established at the time. The one thing they did all agree on was their strong anti-Catholic sentiments. Idelette de Boer. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. So Calvin married Idelette de Boer and established himself in Strasbourg. Picardy in France, where Calvin was originally from, was known as a Marano colony. The book points out that his father Gerard was literate, educated, and an advisor to the nobility, which was commonplace for crypto-Jews. Well, we've seen that before. He had high ambitions in mind for his son John. The Old Testament. So Calvin learned Greek and Hebrew, which allowed him to read the Old Testament in its purest form. His friends Kopp and Farrell were both Sephardic, as was his wife. Well, let's say that's pretty obvious. The book points out that a picture of Calvin shows him wearing a head covering with a full beard, darker skin tone, and that he moved in Marano circles. Well, we saw that in the previous slide where it looks like John Knox. So John Knox's childhood is largely unknown. He was born in Haddington, Scotland, just outside Edinburgh, and attended university. Though I can't remember if the book actually states which university, but well, probably didn't, otherwise I would have put it in, but anyway. Though the authors believe he didn't graduate, instead taking up a priesthood career at a young age. So already you see the parallels with Calvin, or Cohen. That's another theory as well, that John Calvin's real name was John Cohen. But anyway, he came under the influence of George Wishart, a Lutheran minister. Wishart was burned for heresy by Cardinal Beaton, and the Reformation took a dark and bloody turn. The cardinal was later killed by a Protestant mob who stormed St. Andrew's Castle. And here you can see Cardinal Beaton and George Wishart. That's their paintings. The Geneva Bible. The Protestant Revolution was short-lived, and Knox was arrested and sentenced to serve as a galley slave on a French vessel for almost 2 years, 19 months in total. King Edward VI of England released him, and Knox went on to serve as a royal minister in northern England. When Edward died and his Catholic sister Queen Mary took the throne, Knox fled to Europe. Yeah, he was out of there faster than you can imagine it, I would think. He wasn't going to hang around for that shit. Fuck that, I'm out of here. Eventually meeting John Calvin in Geneva, the pair translated the Bible from Latin to English, creating the Geneva Bible. Knox also penned the Faithful Admonition, which called for the violent overthrow of female monarchs. Mary de Guise and Queen Bloody Mary, so he doubled down on this with his first blast of the trumpet against the monstrous regiment of women, attacking both Catholic queens of Scotland and England, Mary de Guise, the mother of Mary Queen of Scots, and Mary Tudor, or Bloody Mary. In the mid-16th century, several Scottish nobles signed a covenant declaring the Protestant faith Scotland's national religion. Under Knox, the Scottish Parliament declared itself Protestant under the, quote, Scots Confession, and Catholicism was outlawed. There's something to point out when you look at Mary de Guise and Mary Tudor. Notice they have the auburn reddish hair. There's a good book by Ralph Ellis that goes into the whole bloodline, got it over there, just give me a sec. What's it called again? Mary Magdalene, the Princess of Orange. We'll get into all this in the future. Ralph Ellis's work about bloodline and all this, and red hair being the symbol of royalty. What's kind of the reddish, kind of auburny hair. Very interesting. Old Testament. So shortly after that, the Scottish Parliament adopted the, quote, Book of Discipline, and Knox created a system of education and welfare that applied to the entire population, financed by selling Catholic properties. Knox overhauled the content of church worship, focusing entirely on scripture, particularly the Old Testament. Is anyone really surprised at this point? Knox is even compared to Old Testament prophets in the book. He was known as the second Jeremiah. Not in when Scotland was Jewish, I mean in Edinburgh in real life. He was a true believer in the Bible as God's sacred word, and that the scriptures exclusively should serve as a religious guide. So yeah, once you get into the whole House of Orange, bloodline and all that. House of Orange, by the way, is reference, I think, to, it's kind of like a subtle reference to the hair color. The bloodline, the red line, the rose line, I think that also has a lot to do with red hair and all this. And yeah, it's an interesting subject because Scotland has the highest percentage of red hair people in the whole world, 6% of the population. But that's a subject for another time. I'm just kind of briefly touching on it here, but we'll get into all of it down the road. So I'm looking forward to getting into Ralph Ellis's books. If you'll indulge me for a second, I'll see which other ones I've got over on the shelf. Okay, so I've got Eden in Egypt, Scota, Egyptian Queen of the Scots, Mary Magdalene in the House of Orange, all that, Jesus, Last of the Pharaohs, Solomon, Pharaoh of Egypt, Eden in Egypt, all those books. I'm going to get into all those in the future when I get into Ralph Ellis's work, but that's subject for another time. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hope you got a lot out of it, and I'll see you in part 3.